Psalms 119 and verse 126, in the 119th Psalm and the 126th verse, it is time for thee, Lord, to work, for they have made void thy law. It is time for thee, Lord, to work, for they have made void thy law. So obviously, God works when men make void or of no effect his law. Then God deals in judgment. It is time for thee to work, O Lord, for they have made void thy law. That's a scripture that gives us understanding that God will not always tolerate evil. He will not always tolerate wrong. Let's one other scripture, since we said that, we'll get to Revelation 8, but in Psalms 50, to show you what I'm saying, that God works in time when men make void his law. So now that gives you something to think about right now. This earthquake in California, on a major fault. That state is the coast, San Francisco, all that is the San Andreas fault line that is right down through those major cities, and 6 point something magnitude earthquake yesterday, day before, and the rumblings then of the earth underneath this Iceland volcano that they've stopped air traffic coming from the United States flying up over the north route that they take. And Sister Marlow and I took that route going to Israel, going up by Newfoundland and up by Iceland and across, making that curve. And they forbid the airlines to fly that route because ash is spewing from this volcano in Iceland. But now they've discovered that there is a earthquake underneath that volcano that is rumbling the very structure of the volcano itself. Now think of the combined force if both of those would be unleashed by God to explode in the earthquake, and would practically, it would change the whole geographical area up there of Iceland, all that area. So I'm saying that to say that God will not tolerate, by the scriptures, utter evil in man forever. He didn't in the antediluvian age. God said he repented, he made man. Gives you an insight into the character of God. God is love. The Bible said God is love. It also shows you another side of God. That God becomes angry and his wrath. And he can be wrathful. And so here in Psalms 50, we'll move to Revelation 8, that's a promise. But in Psalms, the 18th verse, the 50th chapter, I'm sorry, I'll give you the chapter. I may have said the 18th chapter, 50th chapter, Psalms 50, verse 18. When thou sawest a thief, then thou consentest with him, and hast been partaker with adulterers. Thou givest thy mouth to evil, and thy tongue flameth deceit. Thou sittest and speakest against thy brother. Thou slanderest thine own mother's son. That's your brother, talking to the family of God. These things hast thou done, and I kept silence. Thou thoughtest that I was altogether such a one as thyself. But I will reprove thee, and set them in order before thine eyes. Now consider this, ye that forget God, lest I tear you in pieces, and there be none to deliver. That sounds like a very wrathful God. But he can be angry. He can be very filled with wrath. Consider you that forget God. A person better consider before they forget God. God can tear them to pieces.
Sister Conrad, if you can hear me, Sister Marlow's
tear us
calling
to
you
pieces.
right away.
Consider, don't do that. So it is time now, going to Revelation 8, for God to work, because men have made void thy law. In the 6th chapter of Revelation, giving you a little ladder to get up to Revelation 8, we know that we see the wrath of God here in the 6th seal. In the 6th seal. And not the 7th, the 6th seal. And we see the last verse, verse 13, Revelation, that is verse 5 here, where I've got it. Yes, verse 11. And no, that's one there. And on down, I'll get it here in a minute. Get my 12. Let's take verse 12, yeah. And that's because the phone, I'll ignore that. And I beheld, verse 12, and I beheld when he had opened the 6th seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, the moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll, when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, the chief captains, the mighty men, every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? Now, for proper interpretation of this chapter, beginning with verse 12, and this is a class, so you can ask questions as we go through here. Verse 12, verse 13, verse 14 is prophecy spoken to John, fulfilled in the year of 1914, prophetically. And there's many scriptures we can take to bring all this together in reasoning. But in the year of 1914, in the seal, this was the 6th seal open, which was 6,000 years. And 6,000 years started at the turn of the 19th century. The seal was open at that time, the great earthquake. The 6th seal, fulfilling the 6,000 year from Adam fall, and that is the reckoning of time, when he was thrust out of the garden. Then the 6th seal was open, and there was a great earthquake, and there wasn't anything in the history of mankind that destroyed, that changed society, changed the social structure, the military structure, the economic structure of the nations and the world like that war of 1914. It changed everything about America. It changed everything about the world. It changed everything about Europe. It was the great earthquake, prophetically speaking. And these symbolic signs of the sun and the moon, the natural sun did not become darkened, perhaps where the cannons were firing in Europe and the men were dying. 6 million men died. No figure like that in the history of any war, any historical sequence we can point to. 6 million men died in the First World War. And this was not including families that perished and people that died in Europe. It was a Holocaust. It changed the whole structure. It was a great earthquake. Spiritually, in the historical records of religions of America, there was a spiritual earthquake that took place. For those who study it, those who seek prophecy, understanding of prophecy, and that took place in Hot Springs, Arkansas, where spiritually there was an earthquake, an upheaval, when they ascribed to assembling and ordaining and joining together the largest Pentecostal gathering of spirit-filled people that was then and is now in America, and now in the world also. They have millions across the globe, Europe, and there's always a natural and there's a spiritual. Then when this took place, the sun, the New Testament, was darkened to the understanding and became as black as sackcloth. It's burned burlap, sackcloth. And the moon didn't become literally blood, but the Old Testament only became a sacrificial law to the understanding of the church. That was the earthquake taking place concerning the church. The natural stars did not fall. We have no record of that. Read history. There wasn't a tremendous falling of stars from the heaven, but the spiritual aspect of this prophecy, ministers fell by the thousands upon thousands, both in Europe, America, and other places where the war was being fought. They joined organizational structures, even contrary to their conscience, and became members of organizations they didn't even believe in order to avoid both secular and spiritual, natural and spiritual, and this is in history. You can read these things, and to avoid going to the military and serving their time and perhaps dying as other men did. There was a spiritual upheaval as well as a natural upheaval of society, of all the earth at that time. Then this latter part of this, the 15th verse, and of course the heavens, I didn't comment on that, verse 14, the heaven, that depicts the churches. Again, that's where heavenly places are. We're made to sit together. Heavenly places you're talking about in the church, in the house of God. It departed. It was no longer laid open. It was a scroll rolled together. In secret, men did things to confuse in doctrine, understanding the church. And every mountain and island was moved out of their places. That's a spiritual shaking, as the stars were. So is verse 14 a spiritual shaking, as the earthquake was of that time period. But verse 15 shows that there's to be another finishing judgment or upheaval in the latter part of the sixth seal. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and the rocks of the mountains. This shows that there's to be once again, a fearful time when great men, bondmen, captains, mighty men will seek coverings to get away from one thing, the wrath of God. They will hide themselves again in mountains, which is only a term. You read mountains in the Old Testament speaking of Israel. You read mountains in Isaiah 4, or that is 2 and 2. It's speaking of Mount Zion, the church. Mountain is an elevated place. It's a spiritual symbolism of that which is high above. Island is that which is separated from. When you read in the scriptures, The island is that which is separated from. Iniquity separates God's family, makes them islands, want to live to themselves, believe they can go to heaven, believe in what you believe, I believe what I believe, doesn't matter, we're all going to